Guys, welcome to a classic Western movie review of 1971's Hannie Caulder, starring Raquel Welch, Ernest Borgnine and Christopher Lee. Now, directed by Burt Kennedy, this sees Welch as a homesteader who has the double whammy of having her husband murdered before being assaulted by the trio of outlaw brothers responsible. Full of fury, she hires a bounty hunter to instruct her in the ways of the gun so that she can exact her revenge. Now, of course, this isn't one of those hugely famous Wild West adventures, but it is unique in that, certainly for the time, it twisted traditional genre conventions by having a strong female protagonist. Hannie Caulder, by all accounts, was a huge influence on Tarantino's Kill Bill movies. It's also got a great cast and good old-fashioned mix of revenge, redemption, and the classic Western themes of justice and lawlessness. And if you're going to sell your movie on it featuring the First Lady gunfighter, you can't go far wrong with that being Raquel Welch. Let's take a look. So 1971's Hannie Caulder, for me personally, is an interesting misfire, a great concept that doesn't quite stick its landing, but that's not to say that there aren't interesting elements here. Of course, the most obvious one is the promise of Raquel Welch barely wearing anything but a little poncho and a gun belt. Now, unfortunately, that's not quite enough to hang a whole movie on, even an 85-minute one like this, but still. Now, what we do get, of course, is a story that begins with the brutal and senseless murder of Hannie Caulder's husband and the gang assault of Hannie herself by a group of notorious outlaws led by the psychopathic Emmett Clemens, played by Ernest Borgnine, along with his brothers Frank, played by Jack Elam, and Rufus, played by Strother Martin. Now, this naturally harrowing event sets in motion Hannie's journey from grief-stricken widow to a single-minded angel of vengeance. Her transformation helped along by an infamous bounty hunter, Thomas Luther Price, played by Robert Culp. Now, along the way, they enlist the help of a master gunsmith, Bailey, played by Sir Christopher Lee, and cross paths with a mysterious preacher, played by an uncredited Stephen Boyd. So what does work in Hannie Caulder? Well, Welch, of course, looks amazing, and the idea of having a female badass in the West back in 1971 was, I suppose, quite novel. Welch's star power was huge in the 1960s and 1970s, even if mostly in roles where she was cast because she was stunning. Here she at least gets to take control of her own fate. Now, Welch had starred in Bandoleros, another Western where she gets assaulted, and 100 Rifles, so she was no stranger to the genre. And to be fair to her, she doesn't really look out of place striding through saloons or riding horses. And while Welch is undoubtedly the centrepiece of the film, the supporting cast here is almost too good for the movie. The three villainous brothers, played by Borgnine, Elam and Martin, are hilariously over the top, spending the whole movie shouting and screaming at each other. Borgnine is the leader, and he's constantly keeping the other two from killing each other. Most of the time they feel like they're in their own little movie, but that's okay really because they're brilliantly grubby and sadistic. And Robert Culp, the bounty hunter who takes Hannie under his wings, is a gruff, no-nonsense Western archetype. That stranger who wanders into town kind of guy who's got crazy gun skills. And I like the fact that he and Hannie don't instantly fall in love, but he actually grows to respect her strength and independence. Culp looks like a bit of a mishmash for me of Robert Redford and Peter Fonda, which I'm sure he'd love to hear. I had to IMDb him to actually see if I'd seen him in anything else, which I don't think I have, but it looks like he's been in about every TV show ever made. And of course we have Sir Christopher Lee jumping at the chance to be in a Western in between what seemed like hundreds of horror films that he starred in between the 60s and early 70s. And he does get stuck into a beach set gun battle against some Mexican bandidos. Now the film is also gloriously violent with some good old-fashioned bright red blood spurting everywhere. It certainly takes cues from both the cynicism of the spaghetti westerns and the nastiness of films like The Wild Bunch. So at its core, Hannie Caulder is a revenge tale, predating films such as Last House on the Left and Death Wish. It's nowhere near as nasty as those films, but in a way it's not quite nasty enough. After the quite troubling assault scene, you really want Welch's character to tear through the men who wronged her and really punish them. And of course, they'll all end up eating lead at some point, but it never really feels as satisfying as it should. Now, speaking of the three villains, the early scene where they all take turns assaulting Hannie is obviously distressing, but there's an ill-judged comedy gag thrown in as Strother Martin keeps getting kicked out of the house and missing his turn, which tries to make light of the awfulness obviously occurring inside. Now, Burt Kennedy, a director with a long history of working in the Western genre, films such as The War Wagon and Support Your Local Sheriff, keeps things quite simple here. He doesn't indulge in over-the-top spectacle and mostly keeps the film grounded, allowing for the odd blast of violence. The locations are great here also, filming in Spanish deserts, all barren landscapes and rugged mountains. And shout out to the old prison location used in the film's final act. It's not used enough, in my opinion, but it looks great. Now, I'm fascinated by the uncredited appearance here of Stephen Boyd in this movie. He turns up for literally a scene or two. Maybe he got a little bit lost in the edit, but Boyd was making a few Italian movies in the early 70s, so he was certainly kicking about Europe and maybe just wandered onto set. So yeah, despite its slight runtime, Hannie Caulder's pacing can still feel a little bit uneven, especially in the middle section where the action slows down to focus on Hannie's training and some romantic walks in the sunset. And to be honest, at this point, you're just waiting for it to get some bloody justice done. Now, so what I do like about the movie is that it has a feminist undercurrent, but not a modern bash you over the head version of it.
Hi Barbie. Hi Barbie. Hi Barbie. Hi Barbie.
And the film still has time for a gratuitous topless bathtub scene and tries to sneak in as much of Raquel Welch's flesh as it can. But it doesn't paint her as a superwoman either. She doesn't instantly become an action hero just because she has a new gun. Also, with the exception of the three repulsive brothers and an overfamiliar sheriff, not every single man in this film is a sex-crazed pig obsessed with Welch's backside. So although it doesn't stand toe-to-toe with those greatest westerns lists and leans more into the exploitation genre, Hannie Caulder, for me, is a noteworthy entry in the western genre, and in the years since its release has gained a cult following, especially among fans of westerns and feminist cinema, I suppose. And there's certainly some spaghetti western vibes running through the movie. Maybe it's its Spanish vistas or that candy-coloured red blood or the general sweaty and slimy nature of its villains. Now, it's not in danger of being remembered as one of the genre's defining classics, but it's certainly an ahead of its time exploration of a woman in a man's world that would predate and probably inform Sharon Stone's Quick and the Dead character nearly 25 years later. There had been strong women in westerns before, of course. Joan Crawford in Johnny Guitar, Barbara Stanwyck in The Furies, but here we get an actual gunslinger. So despite it not being the most polished or action-packed western, it is a film that offers a different perspective on the genre with, to be fair, some of the best bad guys in any western. But possibly, and most importantly, as every piece of marketing material is at pains to tell you, it has one of Hollywood's most mind-boggling beauties in as few clothes as they could get away with, looking immaculate whilst gunning down said bad guys, and sometimes that's as much as you need. Go check it out.
You're a hard woman, Hannie Caulder.
Like the man said, there aren't any hard women, only soft men.